The courtroom was filled with people that day. There were all kinds of people there sitting quietly and watching what would happen next. Some people were there because they had to be, while others were just curious about what would go on. Courtrooms have always been interesting places where stories of people's lives unfold, and this day was no different. There was a feeling in the air that something unusual might happen, although nobody could say exactly why. It was just one of those days where everyone seemed to sense that something special was about to take place. In the center of the courtroom stood a teenager who looked very young and somewhat unsure of himself. He wasn't dressed very fancy. He wore simple clothes, a little too big for him, making him look even younger and smaller than he was. He had short hair that wasn't styled at all, just neatly combed to the side, and his shoes were worn and old. He stood there quietly, his eyes looking downward, almost as if he felt embarrassed just to be standing there. You could easily tell that he wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in a place like this, where everyone was, staring and judging him. People whispered quietly to each other, trying to guess what this young boy could possibly have done to end up here. Most assumed he must have gotten himself into trouble, probably something silly or careless that teenagers often do. Up in front, high above everyone else, sat the judge. He was a big, serious-looking man, dressed in the black robe judges always wear. He had been a judge for many years and was known for being strict and sometimes even harsh with the people who came before him. Everyone respected him, partly because they feared him. He didn't smile often, and when he spoke, everyone listened very carefully, not daring to interrupt or disagree. On this day, the judge seemed particularly impatient, as if he already decided. He knew everything about the young teenager standing before him. When the judge started talking, his voice was loud and strong, filling the courtroom easily. He looked directly at the teenager, leaning slightly forward as if he wanted to make sure the boy was paying full attention to every single word. The judge started asking questions in a tone that clearly showed he didn't think much of the teenager. He began by asking why someone so young and obviously inexperienced would find themselves standing in a courtroom, facing serious charges. Without waiting for an answer, he went on, speaking sarcastically about how young people these days think. They know everything, getting into trouble without thinking about the consequences. The courtroom audience listened closely, some nodding along with the judge, agreeing silently with his words, while others felt uncomfortable with how harsh he sounded. The teenager remained quiet, still looking down at the floor. He didn't answer, right away, as if carefully thinking about what he should say. People watching him assumed he must be ashamed or embarrassed, maybe even scared. Some felt a bit sorry for him, while others believed he was simply getting what he deserved. The judge continued, now becoming even more direct and openly mocking the teenager for his clothing, his age, and the fact that he clearly seemed out of place in such a serious setting. He asked sarcastically if the teenager had bothered to prepare himself at all, if he even knew anything about how a courtroom worked or understood the seriousness of being there. The laughter in the courtroom grew, and people began openly smiling and whispering more loudly, clearly amused by the judge's harsh comments. Yet the teenager still did not react with anger or frustration. He stood there calmly, quietly, without speaking or showing any disrespect. Despite the judge's sharp words, he maintained his composure. It seemed like he was waiting for something, maybe the right moment to speak. Or perhaps he was just trying not to show how much the judge's mocking was hurting him. Even though he was silent, there was something about him, something quiet but strong, that began to make a few people in the courtroom curious. They started to wonder if maybe there was more to this young boy than the judge realized. But most still thought he was just another teenager who had made foolish decisions and was now facing the consequences. The judge noticed the teenager's continued silence and seemed to become irritated by it. He asked why the teenager wasn't responding, suggesting perhaps he was too scared or too confused to speak up. He mocked the idea that someone so young could even understand the law or what it meant to stand in a court. The judge turned to the audience, almost like he was performing, asking them if they really believed a boy like this could handle something so serious. People laughed again, louder this time, encouraged by the judge's attitude. The courtroom felt less like a place of fairness and more like a stage where one person was being singled out for embarrassment. Finally, after several long minutes of this treatment, the teenager raised his head and looked directly at the judge. For the first time, everyone could see his eyes clearly, and what they saw surprised them. There was no fear there, no shame, only calmness and a steady confidence that didn't match his age or his appearance. The judge seemed caught off guard by this sudden change and stopped speaking, unsure for a moment about what he saw in the teenager's eyes. The room grew silent, everyone waiting now to hear what the boy would finally say. Very politely, and in a clear, gentle voice, the teenager asked if he could speak for himself. His voice was not loud, but it was steady and calm, and everyone could hear him clearly. The judge, still looking surprised, gave permission, expecting perhaps another awkward or confused answer from a young person who clearly didn't belong there. Instead, the teenager began to speak slowly and confidently, choosing his words carefully, using language simple enough for anyone in the room to understand clearly. He explained gently that he understood exactly why he was in court today. He began to speak about the law, calmly explaining basic points about how the courtroom functioned and the purpose of each person who was present. He spoke about fairness and justice, mentioning that everyone had a right to be treated with respect, regardless of age or appearance. As he spoke, people started leaning forward in their seats, suddenly paying close attention. They had expected confusion or embarrassment, but instead they heard careful, thoughtful explanations of how the legal system worked. It was clear the teenager knew exactly what he was talking about, surprising everyone. The judge, however, was still not convinced. He thought perhaps the teenager had simply memorized a few clever lines to impress people. Determined to test him further, the judge started asking complicated questions about specific laws, certain cases, and difficult legal concepts that usually only experienced attorneys or judges knew well. He expected the teenager to stumble and fall silent again, proving he didn't truly understand what he was talking about. But instead, to everyone's surprise, the teenager calmly answered each question. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, and carefully explained each point clearly and simply, making everything easy for everyone to understand. Each time the judge challenged him, the teenager gently but firmly replied with accurate, thoughtful answers, never losing his calmness or his respectfulness, even though the judge had treated him unfairly. Slowly, the faces of people watching changed from amused and mocking to genuinely amazed and curious. People in the courtroom started whispering again, but this time, their whispers sounded very different. Now they were talking about how surprising this was, how strange that a boy so young could speak so well about difficult things like law and justice. The judge himself began to show signs of discomfort, clearly unsure of what was happening. He had started the day mocking and dismissing this teenager, convinced there was nothing special or important about him. Now, in front of everyone, he was realizing he had underestimated someone very remarkable. The teenager paused briefly, allowing everyone to fully absorb what was happening. The courtroom was now completely quiet, everyone waiting anxiously for what he might say next. He took a deep breath, looked around calmly at everyone, and prepared to speak again, clearly with something even more important and surprising to share. At that very moment, everyone in the courtroom knew something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes, something they would remember for a very long time. The judge himself was now fully focused, clearly waiting, almost nervously, for what this teenager would reveal next. The teenager stood quietly in front of everyone, clearly aware that all eyes were focused on him. The courtroom had become very silent, like people were almost holding their breath, waiting to hear what he would say next. It seemed like everyone now understood that this was no ordinary teenager. Even the judge, who had spent the last several minutes mocking him openly, was now quietly watching him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. The boy's calmness and careful words had started to change everyone's feelings and opinions about him. Nobody was laughing now. Instead, they were leaning forward, eager to hear more from this surprising young person who had managed to capture everyone's attention with his simple yet confident answers about the law. Taking a slow, deep breath, the teenager continued speaking, carefully choosing every word. He explained that appearances could be misleading. Sometimes people judge others based only on what they see on the outside, not realizing the truth hidden within. The courtroom listened quietly as he spoke gently about how he had learned this lesson himself, experiencing many moments when people misunderstood or underestimated him just because he was young. The judge listened carefully now, no longer mocking but clearly interested in understanding more about this boy standing before him. The teenager's words were clear and calm, touching something inside everyone who heard him. The judge then asked another question, trying to test the teenager once more. He wanted to see if this boy truly understood what he was talking about, or if he was just cleverly pretending. The question he asked was quite complicated, involving specific points of law that even some experienced attorneys found difficult to understand clearly. Many people in the courtroom looked worried for the teenager, wondering how he could possibly answer correctly. But again, to everyone's amazement, the teenager calmly explained the answer in very simple and clear language. He didn't just answer correctly. He made sure that everyone in the room could understand easily, as if he were teaching rather than defending himself. People began whispering again, not mockingly this time, but with excitement and admiration. They realized that this young person was truly special. He wasn't just answering questions well, he was gently teaching everyone something important about fairness and respect. The judge, who moments ago had been very confident in his mockery, began feeling slightly embarrassed. It was clear to everyone watching that he had judged this teenager wrongly. He had assumed the teenager was unimportant and inexperienced, but now he saw clearly that this young boy understood much more than anyone expected. Feeling slightly uncomfortable, the judge asked yet another difficult question. This one was even harder, involving a case from many years ago. Most people in the courtroom didn't know this case at all, and even those who did struggled to remember all the details. The judge believed this would finally prove that the teenager wasn't as smart as he appeared. But instead, calmly and clearly, the teenager again began explaining the case, the laws involved, and even described how the outcome had influenced future laws. Everyone listened carefully, amazed by how easily and gently the teenager explained such complicated things. It was clear he had spent a lot of time studying and understanding deeply, much more than anyone had imagined possible for someone his age. Now the judge seemed truly shocked. He sat back slightly in his chair, unsure of what to say next. He had never experienced anything like this in his courtroom before. Usually, people who stood before him were nervous or made mistakes easily. But this teenager was calm, intelligent, and spoke with such clarity that even the judge himself was learning new things. Realizing he couldn't easily embarrass or confuse the boy, the judge changed his approach. He asked the teenager directly how he knew so much about the law and where he had learned all of this. The teenager smiled slightly, looking down humbly, before answering. He explained that since he was very young, he had always been fascinated by justice and fairness. Unlike most other teenagers, he didn't spend his free time playing games or hanging out with friends. Instead, he spent many hours every day studying books about law, fairness, and justice. He read every book he could find, carefully taking notes, making sure he understood every word. People around him thought this was strange, and some even laughed at him, thinking it was odd for a young boy to spend so much time studying complicated things that seemed meant only for adults. He told the courtroom how sometimes his family worried about him. They thought he spent too much time alone, always reading and studying, instead of enjoying life like other teenagers. But the boy explained gently that for him, studying law was not just reading books. It was a way to understand the world better, to make things fairer for everyone, and to help people who didn't have anyone to speak for them. Listening to him, people in the courtroom started to feel deeply moved. They realized they were not just listening to a smart teenager. They were hearing from someone who truly cared about fairness and justice, someone who wanted to make a real difference in the world. The judge listened quietly, surprised and touched by the teenager's honesty. He could see now that he had made a serious mistake. He had mocked someone who was actually doing something incredibly meaningful with his life. Feeling somewhat ashamed, he asked the teenager why he chose to disguise himself and appear in court as an ordinary teenager rather than clearly presenting himself as someone with legal knowledge. The teenager explained calmly and kindly that he wanted to see how people would treat him if they thought he was just an ordinary young person without any special knowledge or abilities. He wanted to understand if people could respect someone simply for being human, without judging them harshly based on their appearance or age. The courtroom grew quiet again, absorbing this powerful lesson. Everyone now understood why the teenager had come into court dressed so simply, why he had allowed the judge to mock him without responding angrily. He was teaching everyone a quiet lesson about respect and understanding. He wanted people to see clearly how easy it is to judge others unfairly, how quickly we can make mistakes when we assume we know everything about someone just by looking at them. As the teenager continued speaking, he shared a story from his life, a simple story that deeply touched everyone who listened. He talked about how one day, when he was studying quietly at the library, an older man noticed him and asked why someone so young was reading such difficult books. The teenager had answered honestly, explaining his dream of becoming someone who could help others understand and achieve fairness. Instead of laughing, the older man had encouraged him warmly, telling him that one day he would make a great difference in the world. That small moment of encouragement meant everything to the teenager. It had given him strength and hope, especially during times when other people mocked or doubted him. He gently reminded everyone in the courtroom that small moments of kindness and respect can change people's lives, just as easily as moments of harsh judgment and mockery can hurt them deeply. As he spoke, people in the courtroom nodded quietly, thinking about their own lives and the times they had judged others unfairly or had themselves been misunderstood or mistreated by someone else. By now, the judge was completely changed. The man who had begun the day openly mocking the teenager was now quietly learning from him. He felt deeply embarrassed about his earlier behavior, but also deeply grateful for the important lesson he was receiving. He asked the teenager, now in a much kinder voice, if he planned to continue studying law professionally and perhaps become a lawyer one day. The teenager smiled softly again and nodded. He said it was his dream to become someone who could stand up for people who couldn't speak for themselves, someone who could make a difference by always choosing fairness and kindness, even when it was difficult. Everyone in the courtroom felt inspired by this gentle yet powerful dream. They realized they were witnessing something special and deeply meaningful, something they would remember for a long time. As the teenager finished speaking, the judge leaned forward slightly and spoke again, this time in a voice filled with genuine respect. He told the teenager that he had never seen anything quite like this before and admitted openly that he had learned a valuable lesson that day. The judge said clearly, so everyone could hear, that he had been wrong to judge someone based only on appearances, without giving them a fair chance. Everyone in the courtroom began applauding softly at first, then louder, showing their support and admiration for the teenager who had taught them such an important lesson so gently and respectfully. The teenager stood there quietly, accepting their applause humbly, clearly touched by their support. The judge himself clapped as well, acknowledging the young man's courage, wisdom, and dignity. The courtroom, which had begun the day filled with judgment and mockery, was now filled with respect, admiration, and genuine understanding. Everyone present knew clearly they had just experienced something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. They left the courtroom that day feeling deeply inspired, changed forever by the simple, powerful words of one young teenager who had shown them the true meaning of respect, fairness, and kindness. After the applause quieted, down in the courtroom, there was a special kind of silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when people know something important has just taken place. The teenager stood there calmly, looking around gently at everyone. Even though he had shown incredible strength and wisdom, his eyes still held a softness that made people feel comfortable and safe. It was clear he wasn't proud or arrogant about what he'd just done. Instead, he seemed humble, quietly thankful for the chance to share what was truly important to him. The judge looked down for a moment, thinking deeply about everything that had just happened. Then, slowly and carefully, he started speaking again. But this time his voice was different. He wasn't loud or harsh anymore. Instead, his voice was gentle, respectful, and even a bit shy. He told everyone openly how he had made a mistake. He admitted honestly that he judged the teenager wrongly because of how he looked and because he was young. He spoke about how easy it is for people to make quick judgments without really thinking. Everyone in the courtroom listened quietly as the judge continued speaking, feeling deeply touched by his honesty. The judge shared something personal with everyone. He explained that during all his years as a judge, he had seen many people come into his courtroom. Some were guilty, some were innocent, and some were simply misunderstood. Over time, he had become used to quickly deciding things based on how people looked or spoke. He told everyone openly that today's experience had taught him a lesson he would never forget. He realized he had forgotten to really look at people, to see who they truly were inside. He promised openly, in front of everyone, that from now on, he would try harder to see the real person behind every face, especially young people like the teenager standing before him. People in the courtroom listened carefully to every word the judge said. Many of them felt moved, even inspired by his honesty. They respected him deeply now because he admitted he was wrong, something many powerful people find very hard to do. The teenager also listened quietly, nodding gently as the judge spoke, clearly appreciating his honesty. It was an important moment because it showed everyone clearly that even someone powerful like a judge could learn from others, even from someone young and simple-looking. After the judge finished speaking, he looked kindly at the teenager again. He asked him gently if he could tell everyone a bit more about his life, his family, and how he grew up. The teenager nodded, smiled softly, and began speaking again in his calm, clear voice. He told everyone about his childhood, growing up in a simple house with a loving family. He explained how his parents always taught him to be kind, fair, and respectful to others no matter how they treated him. His parents believed deeply in fairness and kindness, values they taught him every day. The teenager explained gently how sometimes people misunderstood him because he didn't always act like other children his age. He enjoyed playing sometimes, of course, but he also loved spending hours reading and studying things that seemed complicated to other children. He was curious about everything around him. He loved learning, and he especially loved learning about justice, fairness, and how people could live together peacefully, respecting each other's differences. He shared openly how, from a young age, he dreamed of becoming someone who could help others understand each other better. The courtroom listened quietly, imagining clearly what it was like for a young boy growing up with such big dreams. They understood now why he seemed so different from other teenagers. He wasn't strange or odd, just deeply thoughtful and caring, always thinking about how he could make life better and fairer for others. Many people listening felt touched, remembering their own childhood dreams, realizing again how important it is to support young people who want to make a positive difference in the world. The teenager then shared another important moment from his childhood. He explained that when he was about 12 years old, he had a teacher who noticed his special interest in reading and studying deeply. This teacher took extra time after school, every day, helping him understand difficult books and complicated ideas. That teacher never laughed at him or told him he was too young to understand. Instead, she always encouraged him, telling him he could achieve anything he set his mind to. The teenager explained gently how much this support had meant to him, giving him courage and confidence to keep learning even when other children laughed at him. Everyone listening could feel deeply how important these simple acts of kindness had been in shaping this young person's life. They understood clearly that small moments of encouragement could truly change someone's future. Even the judge listened closely, nodding slowly, thinking perhaps about his own life, remembering people who had helped him when he was younger. The teenager also shared honestly about moments when he had felt very alone because of his interests. Sometimes his friends didn't understand why he would rather study law books than play outside or watch television. They teased him sometimes, not meaning to hurt him, but it still made him feel isolated. He gently explained that these moments taught him an important lesson. Sometimes the right path is not always the easy path. Even though it was sometimes hard, he never gave up on his dreams because he believed deeply in what he was doing. He knew clearly that if he kept working hard, one day he could help others and make the world a better place. Hearing this, many people in the courtroom thought quietly about their own lives. remembering times when they felt alone or misunderstood. They admired deeply how brave and determined this young teenager was. He was teaching everyone, not just about fairness and respect, but also about courage and the importance of never giving up on what you believe is right. As he continued speaking, the teenager also explained how he secretly started studying law, seriously, even when he was still very young. He shared openly that sometimes he would quietly visit libraries, taking home thick books about laws, court cases, and history, reading late into the night. He often woke up early to read before school, always making sure he understood every page clearly. He explained how it became his passion to understand the legal system deeply, not just to know many laws, but to understand why those laws existed, how they protected people, and how sometimes they needed changing to become fairer. He gently admitted that at first he didn't tell anyone about his deep studying. He felt a little shy about it, worried people would laugh or think he was strange. But eventually people close to him began noticing how much knowledge he had, how easily he explained complicated ideas. Some encouraged him openly, while others still doubted him. But the teenager explained kindly that he learned how important it was to keep believing in himself, even when others weren't sure. He gently reminded everyone in the courtroom how important it is to trust yourself and your dreams, even if others around you don't always understand. The judge listened quietly, feeling deeply touched by the teenager's honesty and wisdom. Everyone in the courtroom was now fully focused, listening carefully as the teenager continued sharing about his life. They felt inspired by his quiet courage and determination, realizing again how special this young person truly was. The courtroom had changed completely. Instead of judging or laughing, people were now quietly learning from the teenager, inspired by his gentle words and honest heart. It was clear to everyone now that this young person was not just intelligent. He had a deep understanding of human feelings and experiences. He spoke openly about kindness, courage, and respect, lessons everyone listening knew were important, but sometimes forgot in daily life. The teenager was gently reminding them of these simple truths, showing them clearly how powerful these simple values could be. As he finished speaking about his early life and the struggles he faced, the courtroom was filled again with a deep, thoughtful silence. People felt they had truly learned something important, something meaningful about life and about themselves. They were thankful to the teenager for sharing his story honestly and gently, teaching everyone valuable lessons without ever sounding arrogant or proud. In that special silence, everyone knew clearly they had witnessed something truly powerful and meaningful. The teenager had opened their eyes and hearts, reminding them of what really matters in life: respect, kindness, courage, and believing deeply in yourself and your dreams. The courtroom had now completely changed. It was no longer just a place of judgment and punishment. It had become a place of learning, understanding, and deep respect, all because of one young person's courage to speak the truth from his heart. As everyone sat quietly in the courtroom, deeply touched by the teenager's words, the judge slowly stood up from his seat. He was usually someone who spoke loudly and confidently, but now he seemed quieter, almost shy, as if he wasn't sure how to begin. He looked carefully at the young teenager and then at everyone else in the courtroom. Then, very gently, he started to speak again. This time his voice was calm, warm, and filled with kindness. He began by telling the teenager that he had truly learned something valuable that day. He admitted openly that at first, he had judged the boy unfairly because of his age and appearance. He said clearly and honestly that he was sorry for doing that. Everyone in the room felt moved by the judge's simple and honest apology. It wasn't common for someone as powerful as a judge to openly admit they had made a mistake, but here he was, doing exactly that. It showed everyone clearly how important the teenager's words had been. It showed that true wisdom wasn't always about being older or having a powerful position, but about being brave enough to speak honestly and kindly, and being humble enough to learn from others. The teenager listened quietly, nodding softly, understanding and appreciating the judge's honesty and humility. The judge continued talking, explaining gently how today's experience had changed something deep inside him. He told everyone how easy it was to judge others too quickly without thinking carefully or trying to understand them. He realized now how harmful this could be, not just for the people being judged, but for himself too. By quickly judging the teenager earlier, the judge had nearly missed an important chance to learn and grow himself. He shared openly that from now on he wanted to be more careful and respectful, taking time to understand people better before judging them. The courtroom listened carefully, feeling deeply touched by this honest reflection from someone who was usually strict and powerful. People were seeing a completely different side of the judge today, a side that was gentle, thoughtful, and caring. Many of them started thinking about their own lives, remembering times they had quickly judged someone unfairly or had been unfairly judged themselves. They felt quietly inspired to change, to be more understanding and patient with others, just as the judge had promised to do. Then the judge looked warmly at the teenager again, gently thanking him for teaching everyone such an important lesson. He said that even though he had been judging cases for many years, he realized today that there was still so much for him to learn. He openly praised the teenager for his courage, wisdom, and kindness. He said clearly that he now deeply respected this young person, not just because he was intelligent, but because he had shown everyone clearly what true respect and kindness looked like in action. After speaking directly to the teenager, the judge turned slightly toward everyone else in the courtroom. He shared openly that today had reminded him of something important that he had forgotten in all his years of being a judge. Every person, young or old, rich or poor, powerful or simple, had something valuable to teach. He explained that everyone had wisdom, even if it didn't look obvious at first. The judge admitted honestly that from now on he wanted to remember this lesson every day, in every case he judged. Everyone listened quietly, deeply touched by his honest words, feeling the sincerity in his voice. The teenager, standing calmly in front of everyone, smiled softly, showing clearly how touched he was by the judge's heartfelt words. It meant a lot to him to hear someone as important as a judge openly admit their mistakes and promise to change. He gently thanked the judge in return, expressing how grateful he felt to have the chance to speak openly about things that were so important to him. Everyone could see clearly that this respectful exchange between the judge and the teenager had changed them both deeply, leaving a lasting impact. As the judge sat down again, the courtroom remained quiet, everyone reflecting deeply on what they had just heard. Some people whispered softly to each other, sharing how moved they felt by everything that had happened today. Others simply sat silently, thinking deeply about their own experiences. It felt like everyone present had learned something truly important, something they would remember for a long time. Slowly, the teenager began speaking again, gently continuing the conversation. He talked about how important it was for everyone to keep an open mind when meeting new people. He explained simply and clearly that each person has a story, a special journey that shapes who they are. Sometimes that story isn't clear from the outside. Sometimes people need others to listen, patiently and respectfully, allowing them the chance to reveal who they truly are. The teenager said gently that if everyone practiced this simple kindness every day, the world would be a much better place. People in the courtroom nodded softly, agreeing quietly with the teenager's wise words. Many realized how often they had rushed through life, quickly judging others without giving them the time or space to truly show themselves. They felt thankful for the teenager's gentle reminder, understanding clearly that small acts of kindness, patience, and respect could truly change lives. The judge nodded quietly too, deeply touched by the teenager's continued wisdom. He softly asked the teenager if he had any special advice he could share, something simple everyone in the courtroom could take with them and practice every day. The teenager paused briefly, thinking carefully about his answer. Then, very gently, he shared something simple but deeply meaningful. He said quietly that the most important thing everyone could do each day was to see the goodness in others, even if it wasn't always easy to find. He explained calmly that every person, no matter how different or difficult they seemed, carried goodness inside. Finding that goodness, he explained simply, was like finding hidden treasure. Once you find it, everything changes. Your heart opens, and kindness and respect become much easier. The courtroom listened carefully, feeling deeply inspired by this simple but powerful advice. It made perfect sense to everyone, touching something deep within their hearts. The judge smiled softly, clearly understanding exactly what the teenager meant. He thanked him again for sharing such meaningful words, admitting openly that this advice would stay with him for the rest of his life. Everyone in the courtroom felt similarly, quietly promising themselves that they would remember and practice this simple wisdom every day. After sharing this important advice, the teenager stood quietly again, giving everyone time to think and reflect on what he'd said. The courtroom felt peaceful and calm, a place filled now with understanding, kindness, and gentle respect. It was clear to everyone that today's experience had truly changed them, reminding them deeply of what mattered most in life: kindness, patience, and the courage to see and value each person's hidden strengths. As the moment stretched quietly, the judge gently asked if anyone else in the courtroom wanted to say anything. Several people slowly stood up, each sharing simple but meaningful reflections about how today's experience had impacted them. Some shared openly about their own mistakes in judging others too quickly, while others expressed heartfelt thanks to the teenager for his bravery and honesty. It was clear that everyone present felt deeply moved and grateful, thankful for the powerful lessons they had learned. By the end of these heartfelt exchanges, the courtroom had completely transformed. What began as a place filled with quick judgments and misunderstanding had become a place of learning, healing, and deep connection. Everyone knew clearly they had experienced something truly special. The teenager's gentle strength, wisdom, and kindness had opened everyone's eyes and hearts, teaching them valuable lessons about respect, humility, and compassion. It was a powerful reminder that every single person, no matter their age or appearance, has the ability to change hearts and minds simply by speaking truthfully and kindly. After everyone had shared their thoughts and feelings in the courtroom, there was a peaceful quietness that felt very comforting. People began slowly standing up, quietly preparing to leave, but it was clear no one really wanted to rush out quickly. They were still thinking deeply about everything they had just experienced. It was as if they wanted to hold on to this special feeling a little longer, carrying the lessons they had learned with them as they returned to their daily lives. The judge slowly stood up once again and gently asked everyone for just one more moment of their time. Everyone paused, turning their attention back to him. He looked around the courtroom with kindness in his eyes, clearly grateful for the chance to speak openly and honestly with everyone. The judge shared that today's experience had been very special for him. He explained gently that it was rare to have such an honest and powerful moment in a courtroom. Usually, courts were places where people argued or fought, where judgments were made and punishments were decided. But today, he said clearly, the courtroom had become something very different and beautiful. It had become a place of learning, understanding, and deep respect. Everyone nodded softly, feeling deeply touched by his words. It was true. Today had shown them clearly that even in a place meant for judgment, kindness and understanding could shine brightly, changing hearts and minds forever. The judge continued, saying openly that from now on, he hoped each of them would remember this day and carry its lessons with them wherever they went. He gently reminded everyone again how easy it was to judge someone quickly, without really understanding them. He explained how today's experience had taught him the importance of patience, respect, and taking time to truly see the value in every person. Then the judge turned warmly towards the teenager, thanking him once more for his courage and honesty. He admitted that at first he had thought the teenager was someone he could easily dismiss or make fun of, but now he saw clearly how wrong he had been. He explained gently how grateful he felt that the teenager had patiently taught everyone such important lessons even when it was difficult. He encouraged the teenager warmly, telling him openly that he believed he would become someone truly special in the future, someone who could change many lives for the better. The teenager smiled, softly, feeling deeply moved by the judge's kind words. He stood there quietly, his eyes full of gratitude and warmth. Then, He gently spoke again, thanking everyone in the courtroom for their openness, kindness, and willingness to listen to him. He explained simply and clearly that it had been his dream to help people understand each other better, to encourage kindness and fairness wherever he could. Today's experience, he shared gently, had deeply encouraged him to keep following his dream, knowing clearly now that his voice truly mattered. People in the courtroom listened carefully, feeling deeply inspired by the teenager's gentle determination and sincere gratitude. They realized clearly that this young person had a special gift, an ability to speak honestly and kindly, touching people's hearts deeply, making them see clearly how important kindness and respect truly were. Many quietly promised themselves that they too would speak up more often, gently reminding others of these important lessons whenever they could. As people began slowly leaving the courtroom, something special happened. Several people walked quietly up to the teenager, gently shaking his hand, thanking him softly for teaching them something important today. They expressed heartfelt gratitude, telling him how deeply he had impacted them with his simple, wise words. The teenager listened carefully, warmly thanking each person in return, clearly touched by their sincere words. It was a beautiful, gentle moment full of warmth and deep connection. Even the judge came down from his seat, walking softly towards the teenager. Everyone watched quietly, understanding clearly how meaningful this moment was. The judge stood gently in front of the teenager, looking directly into his eyes. He reached out warmly and shook the teenager's hand, softly thanking him again for being brave enough to teach everyone something truly valuable. The judge said clearly and sincerely that he would never forget this day, promising openly to remember and practice the lessons he had learned. Everyone watching felt deeply moved by this respectful exchange, knowing clearly that both the teenager and the judge had truly changed each other's lives today. As the courtroom slowly emptied, people walked out gently and quietly, carrying the special feeling of warmth, respect, and understanding with them. They knew clearly that today had deeply changed them, reminding them how powerful kindness, patience, and openness could truly be. Many promised silently to themselves that they would try to live differently from now on, treating others with more patience, respect, and kindness, just as they had seen and felt today. After everyone had gone, the teenager stayed behind a little longer, quietly sitting alone in the courtroom. He looked around the empty room, feeling deeply thankful for everything that had happened. He thought carefully about how this day had started, how scared and uncertain he had felt at first, and how beautifully everything had changed. He smiled softly, understanding clearly that even though the day had begun with harsh judgment and misunderstanding, it had ended with kindness, wisdom, and true respect. He stood up gently, ready to leave, feeling deeply encouraged and inspired. He knew clearly now that his dream of becoming someone who could help people truly understand each other was possible. Today's experience had shown him clearly that one simple conversation, spoken honestly and kindly, could change many lives. He promised himself that he would never stop believing in his dream, no matter how difficult things became. He knew clearly, now that his voice mattered deeply and that by speaking openly and gently, he could truly help others find understanding and peace. As he stepped softly out of the courtroom, the teenager felt a sense of peace and deep happiness in his heart. He knew clearly that today was just the beginning. From now on, he would continue learning, speaking, and gently helping others see the importance of kindness, patience, and respect. He understood clearly now that even one voice speaking honestly and gently could truly change the world. Over the next days and weeks, news of what had happened in the courtroom began gently spreading throughout the community. People who had been there shared openly about their experience, explaining how deeply they had been touched and inspired by the teenager's wisdom and courage. Soon, many more people began talking about what had happened, sharing their own stories of learning, respect, and kindness. It seemed like the gentle lessons learned in the courtroom were now quietly touching many lives, reminding people everywhere of the power of understanding and patience. Even the judge began openly speaking about his experience, telling colleagues and friends honestly how much the teenager had taught him. He explained simply and clearly how easy it had been for him to make judgments quickly, without truly understanding the people who came before him. But now, he promised openly, he was committed to changing his approach, taking more time to listen, understand, and show respect to everyone who stood before him. His gentle honesty inspired many others, encouraging them to also reflect deeply on their own behavior. The teenager continued studying quietly, always focusing deeply on learning more about justice, fairness, and human kindness. He knew clearly now that his future was bright and meaningful. He felt deeply encouraged and inspired by all the support he had received since that day in the courtroom. He knew clearly now that his voice mattered deeply and that he could truly make a difference in people's lives. Over time, the teenager became well known for his wisdom, kindness, and gentle courage. He went on to study law officially, quickly becoming a respected lawyer known for always choosing fairness, kindness, and respect. He continued gently teaching others through his words and actions, always reminding people clearly of the important lessons he had shared that special day in the courtroom. People everywhere remembered his simple advice, to look for goodness in everyone and never rush to judge. This gentle wisdom continued quietly spreading, touching hearts and minds everywhere, changing lives in quiet but powerful ways. And every time someone remembered this advice and treated another person with patience and kindness, they thought warmly of the wise teenager who had bravely taught everyone the true meaning of respect and understanding. In the end, the simple but powerful lessons of kindness, patience, and respect continued gently living on, forever reminding everyone clearly that true strength comes not from harsh judgments, but from gentle wisdom, honest conversation, and deep respect for one another.